Hi, it's Michelle from IELTS Advantage. How do you feel today? Me, I'm a little bit tired. My neighbor's dog started barking at 4:30 this morning and woke me up, and now I'm feeling a little bit tired. If my neighbor's dog hadn't started barking at 4:30 in the morning, I wouldn't have woken up and I wouldn't be so tired today. We are going to practice conditionals. Now, one of the things that you have to do if you want to score a 7 or higher in the speaking test or the writing test is show the examiner that you can use a range of different grammar structures accurately. Conditionals are really helpful in the speaking test in particular. And in part 3, they're really helpful because they help you to develop your answers. And one thing that you need to do to score a 7 or higher for fluency and coherence is develop your answers. So today we're going to look at conditionals. We're going to talk about why we use conditionals, go over the grammar rules. I'm going to talk about some common mistakes I see students make with conditionals, how to avoid those mistakes. We're going to do a little bit of practice with some part 3 speaking questions. I'm going to show you how you can use conditionals to improve your answers. And then at the end, I'm going to give you a short task to practice with. So what are conditionals and why do we use them? Well, we actually use them for a lot of different purposes, a lot of different reasons. One reason is to show the consequence of something. If you book your IELTS test before you can get the score you need in every part of the test, you are wasting your money. We use conditionals to talk about hypothetical situations. If I were you, I would practice using conditionals. We use conditionals to speculate about the future. If you use conditionals accurately in your speaking test, you will impress the examiner. We use the third conditional to imagine a different past situation. If the neighbor's dog hadn't started barking at 4:30 in the morning, I wouldn't have woken up. And we use conditionals to imagine a different situation now based on a different situation in the past, so a different past. If the neighbor's dog hadn't started barking at 4:30 this morning, I wouldn't be tired now. So those are some of the different reasons that we use conditionals. Let's go over the different types of conditionals and the grammar for each one, and then we'll look at some common mistakes. So the first type is the zero conditional. When it rains, it's hard to get a taxi. What happens in your country when it rains? Do the roads get muddy? Something else? What happens when it rains in your country? This is the first conditional. It's when we're stating facts, universal truths. So we use if or when. If it rains, it's hard to get a taxi. When it rains, it's hard to get a taxi. The first conditional is slightly different. If you improve your vocabulary, you will increase your scores in every part of the IELTS test. So here we use the modal. I am using a modal because I can't say with 100% certainty for sure, absolutely, that your scores go up. I can't even say that will go up. I need the modal because it's my interpretation. Modals are always expressing the speaker's interpretation of events. When I say, when it rains, it's hard to get a taxi, that is a fact. That is not my interpretation of the event. It is simply a fact. It is hard to get a taxi. But when I talk about what will happen to you if you improve your vocabulary, that is my interpretation of the events based on quite a bit of experience and the experience of a lot of our VIP students who have improved their vocabulary. But nevertheless, it is my interpretation. I'm very sure, so I use will. When we use the second conditional, right, we're talking about imaginary situations. For example, if I had more time, I would learn how to play the piano. What would you do if you had more time? The third conditional is for imagining past imaginary situations. So we could say, if she had learned how to write a good task 2 essay, she might have passed her IELTS test. Did she know how to write a good IELTS task 2 essay? No, unfortunately, she did not. Did she pass her IELTS test? No, unfortunately, she did not, which is too bad, right? We use third conditionals often to express regret. If she had learned how to write a good task 2 essay, she might have passed her IELTS test. And then we have mixed conditionals. If you had learned 5 new words every day last year, before now, so we're talking and imagining a different past scenario, unless maybe you did learn 5 new words every day last year, in which case, well done. But maybe you didn't. But if you had learned 5 new words every day last year, then today, now, you would know an extra 1,802 new words. So the different situation we're imagining now is knowing 1,800 new words, but that would have required a different past situation of learning 5 new words every day. By the way, if you start today learning 5 new words every day, in a year's time, you will know that many new words. And in a year's time, you will wish you had started today. So let's take a look at some common mistakes now that students make with the grammar. So we're going to talk about 2 common kinds of mistakes students make with modals. The first is with the grammar. The second is with the pronunciation. So with the grammar, by far the most common mistake students make is putting the modal in the if clause. So if I will become a VIP student, Michelle will help me increase my IELTS scores. But you can't put the will in the if clause. It's not if I will become a VIP student, it's if I become a VIP student, Michelle will help me increase my IELTS scores. Another example is, if I would have fixed my key mistakes, I would have increased my IELTS scores. Now we can't put the modal in the if clause. So we can't say if I would have fixed my key mistakes. It's if I had fixed my key mistakes, I would have increased my IELTS scores. So that is the most common mistake that students make with the grammar when it comes to conditionals. The second kind of mistake that students make with conditionals is with the pronunciation. So we're going to start with a little bit of listening practice. I'm going to give you a sentence and you can either pause the video and write it down, or just think in your head, do I know which words she is saying? If I had to write it down, could I write it down? So I'll say it a couple times and then we'll talk about why it sounds the way it does. So the sentence is, if I'd been there, I'd have helped him. If I'd been there, I'd have helped him. I wasn't there, so I didn't help him, but if I'd been there, I'd have helped him. If I'd been there. If I been there. Now, clearly it's not if I been there. Been is B-E-E-N, but we don't say been because it's reduced, so been. Now, you know that that would be grammatically incorrect, if I been there. But why do you hear those sounds? What is the actual grammar that you need and how can you get it right? Now, it's important that you can fill in the missing pieces of the grammar that your ears don't hear because I didn't say them, if you're going to improve your pronunciation, because the way to improve pronunciation is to copy, listen and repeat after native speakers. But you have to understand what you're repeating, otherwise it's just meaningless sounds. So if I'd been there, if I had been there. Now, why does it sound like if I been there? If I had been. Now, had ends with a d sound, had. Been starts with a b sound. When we have a d sound before a b sound, the d sound changes, and it changes to a b sound. So it sounds like not had been, but have been, have been. So you can see when I get to the part of the word that's supposed to be the d sound, which I would make with my lips open, d, had, d, my lips are already closed because I am making the b sound. Now, I don't say have been. I don't pronounce the b sound twice. We never do that in English. We never pronounce the same sound twice like that. So, have been. Now, if I have been there, so you don't hear the sound of the H with a have, because I don't make it. I did not say if I have been there. I said if I been there. So the H sound at the beginning of the word have, it often disappears. It's easier not to say it, so that's why native speakers won't say it. If I'd been there, I'd helped him. I'd helped him. So I'd, what words are those? I'd. It's 3 words. 3 words that together sound like I'd. And it's I would have. So I would are contracted. I'd. Have gets reduced to I'd. And then we have the linking, the consonant to vowel linking, which makes it sound like all one word. I'd. I would have. I'd. And then we have help him. So the sound at the beginning of him disappears. Again, it often does. And the helped him, the final sound of helped attaches to the next vowel sound of the next word. So it kind of like shifts over. So we have I'd helped him. If I'd have been there, I'd have helped him. Let's do another example. So here's the next sentence. I wouldn't have done that if I were you. I wouldn't have done that if I were you. I wouldn't have done that if I were you. So I'm not you, but I'm criticizing the decision that you made by saying, I wouldn't have done that if I were you. Now, if I were you, those 4 words at the end, I think everybody's got those. But how about before that? I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have done that. How many words do you hear? Can you count them? Could you write them down? I've got 6. Did you get 6? I wouldn't have done that. So the 6 words are I would not have done that. I wouldn't have. So I think that this is probably the trickiest part. How many words am I saying right now? I wouldn't have. I wouldn't have. It's 4. I wouldn't have. Could you write down those 4 words? The first one is I. I wouldn't have. I would not have. I would not have. So what happens to the pronunciation? How does I would not have become I wouldn't have? I wouldn't have, which just kind of sounds like a sound. Not even a word that you would recognize, but just a sound. I wouldn't have. So I would is contracted to I'd. I would not. I would not is contracted, wouldn't. And then that's contracted. So we have I wouldn't. And then we have. I would not have. And have sounds like again, which happens sometimes. So sometimes have is just the schwa sound. It's just the So I would not. I wouldn't. And then we have that connected to the have, I wouldn't. But there's one sound that disappears, isn't there? I would not have. Where does that sound go? Did you hear it? I wouldn't. You didn't hear it because I didn't say it. I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't. I wouldn't. Now, why do we lose the sound? I wouldn't have done that. It's possible, depending on the speaker's accent, that they might pronounce the t and connect it to the vowel sound in have. I wouldn't have. And then have would sound like of instead of just Depends on the accent of the speaker. I did ask my husband to say this as well. I'm Canadian and he's British, and I wanted to check to see if a British speaker would pronounce it any differently, and he didn't. He also said, I wouldn't. So there you go. It's pretty common, I think, to pronounce I would not have as I wouldn't. Now, can you do it? Can you pronounce I wouldn't? I wouldn't. I wouldn't. I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have done that if I were you. I wouldn't have done that if I were you. Da 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 da. It's quite quick, isn't it? Conditionals are often pronounced quite quickly, which is something else to keep in mind, both for when you're listening and you're doing listening practice, and then when you're trying to copy a native speaker to match or mimic their pronunciation. So let's do a little bit of practice now with some part 3 questions. So sometimes in part 3, you will be asked hypothetical questions. It's one of the common question types that you can be asked. So for example, you might be asked, what would life be like if people didn't have to work? So if the examiner asks you this question, they are looking to see if you can use hypothetical structures. So it's important that you show the examiner that you can. So a good way to answer this question would be, well, if people didn't have to work, they'd get bored quickly. People need structure in their life, and work provides that structure. People think they don't like working, but as soon as people don't have work, they very quickly become unhappy. Boredom is a very unpleasant and negative feeling. I'm using conditionals to answer the question. Or you could get a question that's not a conditional, but I want to show you how using conditionals can help you develop your answer. So you might get asked an opinion question. Do you think cars should be banned in city centers? You should answer the question directly. Yes, I think that's a great idea. You should explain why. If cars, so here I'm using a conditional to explain why I think it would be a great idea. If cars were banned from city centers, it would make it a lot easier for people to walk and cycle. I'm using conditionals to explain. When cars, right, when city centers are full of vehicles, it's loud, it's noisy, and it's dangerous for cyclists and pedestrians. There I use the zero conditional because I am stating a fact about cars and safety. So I use 2 conditionals in my answer to a question that was just asking me for my opinion. Here's another example. Do you think budget airlines bring more positive or negative effects? Answer the question directly. I think they bring more negative effects. Explain why I think so. Okay. Airplanes cause a lot of pollution, and when people can afford to travel regularly, that means airlines put on more flights to accommodate the demand. More flights leads to more pollution. Now, I would like to develop that answer a little bit more, and here's where a conditional is really handy. If flights were more expensive, like they were, 20 or 30 years ago, people would travel far less. They might have one holiday every year or a holiday every other year, and that would greatly reduce the amount of pollution that's generated by the airline industry. So what I did is I used a conditional to give an example. Examples are great ways of developing your answers. You can't always think of an example. So students say that, part 3 of the speaking test is hard because it's hard to get the ideas, it's hard to think of examples, and I totally understand that. You can use conditionals. Native speakers use conditionals all the time to develop their answers. Think of it as basically trying to convince the examiner that what you've said is true. Conditionals are a great way of doing that. So now it's your turn. I'm going to give you 3 part 3 type questions. What I'd like you to do is to use at least one conditional in your answer. Write about 4 sentences for your answer to each question and use at least one conditional. Now, writing is not the same thing as speaking, so writing practice isn't necessarily going to make you able to use conditionals when you're speaking. So it is important that you also practice speaking. So what I would suggest is that you look at the questions and get your phone or I guess everybody has a phone. Get your phone. I was going to say something else to record your answer, but no, just get your phone. Use your voice recorder. Record yourself answering these 3 questions. Try to use a conditional, at least one conditional in each answer, and then listen back to your recording. If you noticed any mistakes with the grammar, any mistakes with the pronunciation, that's fine, that's normal, but try again. Same questions, try again. See if you can make your next answer better. And when you're ready, write down your answers. When you write, of course, you have time to go back and check and make sure you haven't made any mistakes with tenses or modals or spelling. And when you're happy with your answers, then post them down below. And I look forward to seeing what conditional sentences you make for me. If you found this useful, everyone, and you would like more help in how you can increase your IELTS scores, then you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. Good luck with the task and see you next time. Bye-bye.